The Valorian Empire stretched across 47 star systems, each world contributing ships, soldiers, and resources to what historians would later call the greatest military assembly in known galactic history. Admiral Kresh stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, watching thousands of vessels arrange themselves into attack formations. Cruisers the size of small moons, carriers holding enough fighters to blot out suns, and destroyers bristling with weapons capable of cracking planets into rubble. The Armada represented centuries of military tradition and the combined might of species who had conquered their way to supremacy. The tactical display showed green markers stretching beyond visual range. 12,000 capital ships, 40,000 support vessels, nearly 300 million crew members, all preparing to face an enemy the Valorians had underestimated exactly once. That single miscalculation had cost them the Outer Rim territories and 17 colony worlds in less than a month. "Status report," Kresh demanded, his 4 eyes scanning different sections of the display simultaneously. His species, the Valorians, had evolved on a high-gravity world where predators attacked from multiple angles. Their physiology reflected that ancient struggle: broad bodies covered in armored plates, multiple limbs designed for both fine manipulation and brutal combat, and a metabolism that burned through calories to maintain constant readiness. "All battle groups report ready, Admiral," replied Commander Thex, her mandibles clicking with barely suppressed excitement. "The Third Fleet has completed final maneuvers. The 9th and 11th are positioned for the pincer movement. Our scouts confirm the human position hasn't changed." Kresh allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had nowhere to run. They'd chosen to make their stand at the Threshold Gate, an ancient jump point that connected this region of space to their core territories. Destroy their forces here, and the entire human sphere lay open to conquest. The Valorian Empire would absorb Earth and its colonies within a standard year. Perhaps the humans would make decent slaves once they learned proper deference. The first contact disaster still burned in his memory. The Valorian scouts had encountered a small human research station at the edge of claimed space. Protocol dictated a show of force. A few warning shots to establish dominance. Then negotiations from a position of strength. What happened instead had shocked the entire empire. The research station, defended by nothing more than a handful of civilian security officers, had somehow managed to damage 2 Valorian warships before being destroyed. Worse, the humans had transmitted detailed scans of Valorian vessels and tactics throughout their networks before dying. When the Empire sent a proper military expedition to claim human space, they'd expected quick capitulation. Instead, they'd walked into a nightmare. Human ships appeared from nowhere, attacked with weapons that ignored shields and tore through armor, then vanished before the Valorians could respond. Colonies that should have surrendered after seeing the Valorian fleet overhead instead fought to the last defender, often destroying critical infrastructure to deny it to the conquerors. Human civilian vessels rammed military targets. Human soldiers refused to retreat even when tactically surrounded. In one particularly disturbing incident, human defenders had detonated their own base rather than allow Valorian forces to capture strategic materials. The humans weren't just fighting, they were conducting total war with a fanaticism the Valorians had never encountered. They didn't seem to care about casualties, didn't respect the traditional rules of engagement, and showed absolutely no fear of superior forces. It was barbaric. It was terrifying. It was somehow effective, but that effectiveness ended now. The Valorians had learned from their mistakes, adapted their tactics, and assembled an overwhelming response. No amount of human tenacity could stand against 12,000 capital ships. Mathematics didn't care about courage or desperation. "Communications from the human position, Admiral," announced the sensor officer, surprise evident in his voice pattern. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies." "Put it through," Kresh ordered. Perhaps the humans had finally recognized the futility of resistance. A negotiated surrender would save time and resources, even if it wouldn't be nearly as satisfying as crushing them completely. The main display flickered, showing a human female in a simple gray uniform. She appeared young by human standards, though Kresh knew their species had deceptive lifespans. Her skin was dark, her hair cut short in a military style, and her expression carried none of the fear or desperation he'd expected. "Valorian forces," she said, speaking through the translation matrix with unsettling clarity. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Coalition vessel, Remembrance. We acknowledge your presence and your apparent intentions." Kresh leaned forward. This Chen spoke with the calm of someone discussing weather patterns, not facing annihilation. "Captain Chen," he replied, "I am Admiral Kresh, Supreme Commander of the Valorian 3rd Imperial Fleet. Your forces are surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender immediately, and you will be granted status as conquered peoples under Valorian law. Refuse, and we will destroy every human ship in this system and proceed to sterilize your worlds one by one." Chen's expression didn't change. "Admiral, we appreciate the clarity of your position. However, we must decline. The Coalition has sent a response to your invasion. We ask that you withdraw your forces immediately." Kresh felt rage building in his primary stomach. The audacity of this creature. "You ask us to withdraw? You? Look at your sensors, Captain. We have brought enough firepower to turn your homeworld into vapor. You have shown one vessel on our scans. One. Even if your mysterious stealth ships are hiding throughout the system, you couldn't possibly have more than a few hundred vessels. The mathematics of this situation are absolute." "Mathematics," Chen agreed almost thoughtfully. "Yes, the mathematics are absolute, which is why we're asking you to withdraw. The remembrance is sufficient for this engagement." The bridge fell silent. Officers exchanged glances of disbelief. Commander Thex made a sound that the translator struggled to render, somewhere between a laugh and a threat display. "Captain Chen," Kresh said, forcing his voice to remain steady, "perhaps your translation matrix is malfunctioning. You claim that one ship, one vessel, can defeat an armada of 12,000 capital ships and 40,000 support craft." "I didn't say defeat, Admiral. I said the remembrance is sufficient." Chen paused, as if considering her next words carefully. "Your species initiated hostilities. You invaded human space without provocation. You destroyed civilian habitats and killed millions of people who wanted nothing more than to live in peace. We asked you to stop. We pleaded with your government to negotiate. You responded with threats of total conquest and species subjugation." "Such is the right of the strong," Kresh replied. "The galaxy belongs to those who can hold it." "Perhaps," Chen said. "But strength comes in many forms, Admiral. You're about to discover that humanity has specialized in a particular type of strength for a very long time." She straightened slightly. "This is your final warning. Withdraw your forces from human space. Return to your own territories. We will consider reparations and peace terms once you've demonstrated good faith." "Or what?" Kresh demanded. "You'll unleash your mighty single ship? Captain, I've studied your species. You're emotional, irrational, and prone to making threats you cannot possibly fulfill. It's a bluff based on our previous encounters with your guerrilla tactics. But those tactics only work in limited engagements. In a fleet action, there's no place to hide, no way to strike from shadows. There's only raw power, and we have more than you can imagine." "It's not a bluff," Chen said quietly. "And you've made a fundamental error in your analysis, Admiral. You've studied human tactics. You've studied human weapons. But you've never studied human history. If you had, you'd understand what remembrance means in our language. You'd understand why we sent this particular ship." "Enlighten me," Kresh sneered. "Remembrance is memory, Admiral. Specifically, it's memory of things we've lost. Memory of people who died. Memory of promises we made to those who can no longer hold us to them. Chen's eyes seemed to look past the display, seeing something beyond the present moment. Humanity has fought many wars, Admiral. Wars against each other, across every imaginable cause and every possible difference. We've refined warfare over thousands of years, turned it into science and art and horror. We learned hard lessons written in the blood of billions. And the hardest lesson of all was this. Sometimes when someone won't stop hurting you, when they won't listen to reason or respond to mercy, you have to hurt them so badly they never forget. You have to hurt them so badly they never try again. More threats, Kresh said dismissively. Commander Thex, initiate attack pattern Delta. All ships advance. Target the human vessel first. I want this arrogant captain to watch our might before she dies. Admiral, the censor officer interrupted. The human ship is changing configuration. Energy readings are... I can't classify them. They're beyond our measurement scales. On the tactical display, the single blue marker representing the remembrance began to pulse. Numbers scrolled across Kresh's command screen, each reading higher than the last. The ship's energy signature was climbing exponentially, putting out more power than some small stars. "Weapons lock!" shouted the defense coordinator. "The human ship has locked weapons on all of us, simultaneously. Admiral, that's not possible. No targeting system can track 12,000 independent targets with firing solutions. The computational requirements alone... Perhaps your mathematics need updating." Chen's voice cut through the chaos. She no longer sounded calm. She sounded sad. "The remembrance carries a single weapon, Admiral. One system. We built it in the years after you invaded while your empire was celebrating its easy victories in our outer colonies. We built it from our most advanced technology, our deepest scientific knowledge, and our absolute determination to never let anyone hurt us like this again." The energy readings doubled, then doubled again. Warning klaxons began shrieking across the Valorian fleet as sensors reported impossible things. "We built it," Chen continued, "and we named it after our dead. Every person you killed, every child who died when you destroyed our stations, every family torn apart by your invasion. We named it after them, and we promised that their deaths would mean something, that no one would ever again think humanity was weak or easy to conquer." Kresh gripped his command throne. "All ships, emergency evasive maneuvers. Deploy countermeasures, full power to defensive shields." "It won't help," Chen said. "The weapon is already locked, already charging, already committed." She looked directly at Kresh through the display. "I'm sorry, Admiral. I'm sorry your government made the choices it did. I'm sorry you personally accepted this command. I'm sorry for what's about to happen to you and everyone in your fleet. But my sorrow doesn't change what's necessary." The remembrance disappeared from visual sensors, obscured by a shell of energy so bright it registered as a miniature star. The human ship sat at the center of a growing sphere of light that expanded with each passing second. "What is that?" Commander Thex whispered. Kresh didn't answer. He was watching his tactical display, watching as his mighty armada, 12,000 capital ships, 40,000 support vessels, 300 million souls, sat frozen in space, locked in place by targeting fields that shouldn't exist, held by weapons that defied every known law of warfare. "The weapon's name," Chen said, her voice cutting through every communication system in the Valorian fleet simultaneously, ensuring that every ship, every captain, every soldier heard her words, "is final argument. Humanity spent 3 years building it. 3 years taking every weapons theory we ever developed, every destructive concept we ever imagined, and combining them into one system. We tested it exactly once, on an uninhabited moon. The moon no longer exists. Not destroyed, Admiral. It doesn't exist. Every atom was converted to energy. Every molecule was torn apart at the quantum level. It simply ceased to be. The light surrounding the Remembrance had grown so bright that automated systems were shutting down visual displays across the Valorian fleet. Ships that had weathered 1,000 battles, survived countless engagements, now floated helpless before a weapon they couldn't even properly perceive. "You could run," Chen continued. "If I released the targeting locks, some of you might reach jump distance before final argument fired. Maybe a few hundred ships would escape. Maybe more. But Admiral Kresh won't give that order because Valorian military tradition values honor over survival. He'll order you to fight until the end, to die with glory rather than live with shame." Kresh felt his secondary heart skip a beat. How did this human know their military code so well? "So I'm giving the order for him," Chen said. "Every ship in this system except Remembrance is released from targeting lock. You have 60 seconds to begin retreating to jump coordinates. Any ship that powers weapon systems will be relocked and held until final argument fires. Any ship that attempts to advance on our position will be locked. You can fight and die, or you can run and live. Choose." The command channel exploded with voices, captains demanding orders, officers reporting that their ships were indeed free from the targeting lock, junior commanders asking permission to retreat. The organized military machine that had conquered 47 star systems descended into chaos in seconds. "Admiral!" Commander Thex turned to Kresh, her voice tight. "Your orders?" Kresh stared at the display, at his fleet, the pride of the Valorian Empire, at the single human ship that had just made them all irrelevant, at Captain Chen, who watched him with something that might have been pity. 45 seconds, Chen announced. Every military instinct Kresh possessed screamed at him to attack, to advance, to crush this upstart species and restore proper order to the galaxy. But under those instincts, buried deep beneath layers of training and tradition, was the tiny voice of survival. The voice that had kept his ancestors alive on their brutal homeworld. The voice that recognized a predator too dangerous to fight. "All ships," he said quietly. "Calculate retreat vectors. Prepare for emergency jump to Rally Point Sigma." "Admiral?" Commander Thex sounded shocked. "You heard the order. Move." The great Armada, the unstoppable force that had come to crush humanity, began to turn. Thousands of ships powering up jump drives, calculating escape routes, fleeing before a single human vessel. 30 seconds, Chen said. "Why give us this chance?" Kresh asked. "You have us trapped. You could destroy us all. Why let us run?" Chen's expression finally shifted, showing the first hint of emotion beyond calm professionalism. "Because we're not like you, Admiral. We don't wage war for conquest or glory. We don't kill because we can. We kill because we must, to protect ourselves and what we've built. Every Valorian who dies here is a tragedy. Every family that loses someone, every child left without a parent, it's all tragedy. We remember that, even when we're forced to create more tragedy ourselves." Ships began to jump, disappearing in flashes of light as they fled to safety. Hundreds at first, then thousands. The great formation dissolving into a rout. "But make no mistake," Chen continued, her voice hardening. "We will create that tragedy if we must. We will kill every single Valorian in this fleet if you give us no choice. And then we'll build another final argument, and another, and we'll bring them to your worlds, to your colonies, to your capital itself if necessary. Not because we want to, because you've proven you won't stop any other way." 15 seconds, she said, though thousands of ships had already jumped and more were disappearing every moment. Kresh watched his command screen, watched his mighty armada flee, watched centuries of military tradition crumble before human determination. The Eternal Dominion trembled as its jump drives charged, preparing to carry him away from this disaster. "I underestimated you," he admitted. "We all did." "Yes," Chen agreed. "You looked at our small numbers and assumed weakness. You saw our peaceful nature and mistook it for pacifism. You thought because we hadn't built weapons like this before, we couldn't. But, Admiral, humanity's greatest talent isn't warfare. It's learning. We learn from every mistake, we adapt to every threat, and we never, ever forget what we've learned. The jump drive engaged. The last thing Kresh saw before the Eternal Dominion escaped into hyperspace was the Remembrance. Still glowing with the power of its terrible weapon, sitting alone in empty space where an Armada had been moments before. Captain Sarah Chen remained on her bridge long after the last Valorian ship fled. Her crew sat in silence, processing what had just happened. They'd faced down the largest invasion force in recorded history with a single ship. They'd won without firing a shot. They'd saved humanity through deterrence rather than destruction. "Captain," her tactical officer finally spoke. "The weapon is still fully charged. Orders?" Chen touched a control, and the power readings began to drop. The light surrounding Remembrance faded, revealing a ship that looked almost ordinary, almost peaceful. Nothing in its external appearance suggested the horror it carried inside. "Power down, final argument," she said. "Return all systems to standard operation. Send a message to Coalition Command. The invasion is repelled. No human casualties, no Valorian casualties." She paused. "And send a second message to the Valorian government. Tell them we're ready to discuss peace terms whenever they are. Tell them we hope this demonstration has made our position clear. We don't want war. We never wanted war. But we'll end any war brought to us, whatever the cost." She stood from her command chair, feeling the weight of command settle more heavily on her shoulders. Today, she'd saved 300 million lives by threatening to end them all. She'd prevented a war by promising total destruction. She'd protected humanity by becoming exactly what they'd hoped they'd never need to be. "And send one more message," she added quietly. "To all Coalition worlds. Tell them we remember. Tell them every person lost to the Valorian invasion is honored. Tell them the Remembrance served its purpose, not by taking revenge, but by preventing the need for it." The bridge crew acknowledged her orders, and the ship began its journey home. Behind them, the threshold gate sat silent and empty. No invasion fleets, no attacking armadas, just empty space and the fading energy signatures of the weapon that had changed everything. In the Coalition archives, the engagement would be recorded as the Threshold Incident. Historians would debate its implications for centuries. Military theorists would study every aspect of the encounter. But everyone who'd been there, everyone who'd watched humanity face the abyss and step back, knew exactly what it meant. It meant the galaxy had learned a fundamental truth about humans. They weren't the strongest species. They weren't the most numerous or the most advanced. But they possessed something more valuable than any of those advantages. They possessed the absolute determination to survive, whatever the cost. And now they possessed the means to enforce that determination on anyone foolish enough to test it. The Valorian High Council convened in emergency session 3 days after the Threshold incident. The council chamber, carved from a single massive crystal that reflected the light of their binary suns, normally hosted debates about trade agreements and colonial expansion. Today, it would determine the fate of the Empire itself. Admiral Kresh stood in the center of the chamber, still wearing his command uniform, though regulations required formal civilian attire for council appearances. No one had challenged him on this breach of protocol. The broadcast of his encounter with Captain Chen had already reached every corner of Valorian space. Every citizen had watched their invincible armada turn and flee before a single human vessel. Traditional protocol seemed irrelevant in the face of such humiliation. High Chancellor Vex, the oldest member of the Council and architect of the human invasion policy, leaned forward on his platform. His voice carried the weight of authority built over 5 decades in government. "Admiral Kresh, you retreated from battle. You ordered the entire Third Imperial Fleet to flee before engaging the enemy. Explain yourself." Kresh had prepared for this moment during the long journey home. He'd rehearsed speeches about tactical wisdom, strategic repositioning, and necessary caution. Standing before the council, he abandoned all of it. Because Captain Chen was telling the truth, because the human weapon system called Final Argument could have destroyed every ship in our fleet. Because 300 million Valorians would be dead if I'd ordered an attack. Based on what evidence? Demanded Council Member Thax. Sensor readings that could have been faked? Threats from a captain desperate to protect her outmatched forces? You're asking us to believe that humans, who we know for certain have inferior technology, somehow developed a weapon beyond anything in galactic history. I'm asking you to believe the evidence of our own sensors, Kresh replied. The energy readings were real. The targeting locks were real. The computational power required to track 12,000 ships simultaneously was real. Everything about that encounter was real, and everything suggested that Final Argument was exactly what Chen claimed. He paused. But more importantly, I'm asking you to believe human psychology. Chen wasn't bluffing. She wasn't desperate. She was resigned. She'd accepted what she might have to do, and she was prepared to do it. High Chancellor Vex made a dismissive gesture. Psychological assessment from a single encounter is hardly evidence for military policy. We've fought countless species across our expansion. We've seen every type of bluff, every desperate stratagem. The humans simply executed theirs better than most. With respect, Chancellor, we've never fought anyone like the humans. Kresh activated a holographic display, showing footage compiled from the disastrous invasion attempts. Look at this. A human civilian transport, unarmed except for industrial cutting tools, ramming one of our destroyers. The pilot killed himself and 20,000 civilians aboard his ship to damage our vessel. Here, a human colony where every adult strapped explosives to their bodies and detonated them when our troops entered civilian areas. They killed themselves, their families, and our soldiers without hesitation. The display shifted to show a human military base. This one is from the outer rim. Our forces had the base completely surrounded, no possibility of escape. The humans could have surrendered and lived as prisoners. Instead, they fought to the last soldier, then destroyed their own base reactor, killing our troops in the explosion. They chose death over capture every single time. Fanaticism, Thax said dismissively. Crude species often display irrational attachment to losing causes. It's not fanaticism, countered Council Member Presh, the only member who'd actually visited human space before the war. It's calculation. Every human who died in those encounters accomplished something. The transport pilot damaged a destroyer that had to return to port for repairs. The civilian casualties created political complications and slowed our advance. The base defenders eliminated an entire battalion of our best troops. They're not dying pointlessly. They're spending their lives like currency, buying time and inflicting costs. High Chancellor Vex shifted uncomfortably. Even if true, that doesn't justify Admiral Kresh's decision. So the humans are willing to die resisting us. Many species have shown similar dedication. We've conquered them all eventually. The mathematics always favor the side with superior resources. Chancellor, Kresh said carefully, the mathematics changed at Threshold. When one ship can threaten 12,000, when a single weapon system can hold an entire armada hostage, traditional calculations become meaningless. We can't beat them by weight of numbers if they can erase our numbers with single attacks. If the weapon truly exists, Vex emphasized, you still haven't proven that. Show me evidence that Final Argument is real and functions as claimed. Show me data that couldn't be fabricated or misinterpreted. Show me something beyond your personal judgment that this human captain was being honest. Kresh closed his eyes briefly. He'd known this argument was coming. I can't. The only way to prove Final Argument works as claimed would be to let it fire. And if it does work, everyone present to observe would be dead along with the proof. Convenient, Thax sneered. It's the fundamental problem with deterrent weapons, Presh interjected. Their effectiveness relies on not having to use them, but that same restraint creates uncertainty about whether they actually work. The humans are gambling that we're not willing to call their bluff. Then perhaps we should call it, suggested Vex. Assemble another fleet, larger this time. Approach human space again. Force them to either use this supposed superweapon or admit they don't have one. If they use it, we'll know the threat is real. If they don't, we'll know they were lying. The casual willingness to sacrifice another fleet as a test disturbed Kresh more than he cared to admit. And if they do use it, we lose 20 or 30,000 more ships and millions more crew. The Empire has resources, Vex replied. We can afford losses if they give us certainty. What we cannot afford is to appear weak before every species watching this situation. Our empire was built on military dominance. If we back down from the humans, every conquered world will wonder if they too could rebel successfully. Every rival power will consider whether they could challenge us. The cost of perceived weakness might exceed any losses from continued conflict. Kresh understood the political logic. The Valorian Empire ruled through force and the threat of force. Showing mercy or caution could be interpreted as vulnerability. But he also understood what he'd seen at Threshold, a species pushed to the point where they'd built the ultimate expression of "leave us alone or everyone dies." Meeting that determination with more aggression seemed like adding fuel to a fire. Perhaps, he said slowly, there's a middle path. We don't have to surrender, but we don't have to attack either. We could propose negotiations, establish communication channels, test whether the humans are willing to seek peaceful resolution. Negotiations from a position of weakness? Thax sounded scandalized. That's the same as surrender. We'd be admitting the humans defeated us. The humans did defeat us, Kresh said bluntly. Not in the way we usually define defeat. We didn't lose ships or soldiers at Threshold, but they achieved their objective completely. They stopped our invasion. They protected their territory. They made us retreat. Call it whatever you want, but the result was defeat. The council chamber erupted in arguments. Some members supported Kresh's position, citing the impossibility of victory against an enemy who might actually have final argument. Others demanded renewed aggression, insisting that Valorian honor required them to attack until either they won or the Empire fell. High Chancellor Vex let the debate rage for several minutes before calling for order. Enough, he said firmly. We will not make policy through chaos. Admiral Kresh, you are hereby relieved of command and placed on administrative leave pending full investigation of your decisions at Threshold. The Council will appoint a new Supreme Commander for operations against humanity. Kresh had expected this. Relief washed through him anyway. Let someone else carry the weight of the next encounter with Captain Chen. However, Vex continued, we will also authorize preliminary negotiations with human representatives. Not surrender, not peace talks. Simply opening communication channels and exploring what terms they might demand. If those terms prove unacceptable, or if we determine that final argument doesn't exist or cannot be deployed effectively, we will resume military operations. He looked directly at Kresh. You will serve as our negotiator. Since you seem convinced of human determination, you can test that determination at the diplomatic table. The council voted, and the decision passed by narrow margin. Kresh left the chamber knowing he'd bought time at best. The Empire wouldn't abandon its ambitions easily. But time was something. Time to learn more about humanity. Time to understand whether peaceful coexistence was possible. Time to avoid more death. The human response to Valorian negotiation requests arrived within hours. Captain Chen, speaking for the coalition, welcomed diplomatic dialogue and proposed neutral territory for discussions. She also quietly suggested that bringing the remembrance to those negotiations might provide focus for both sides. Standing in his quarters that evening, reviewing preliminary files on human culture and history, Kresh began to understand what Chen had meant about studying human history. He read about wars fought over ideology, resources, religion, territory. Wars between human factions that lasted generations, consumed entire continents, killed millions. The species seemed to have perfected warfare long before they achieved space travel. But more interesting than their capacity for violence was their capacity for resolution. Humans who'd been bitter enemies in one generation became allies in the next. They'd fought wars, then built lasting peace. They'd destroyed each other's cities, then helped rebuild them. They'd created concepts like war crimes, tribunals, and rules of engagement specifically to limit the horror they inflicted on each other. It suggested a species that understood violence intimately but didn't worship it. That fought when necessary, but preferred not to. That could build weapons like Final Argument while hoping never to use it. Kresh drafted his first communication to Captain Chen, requesting guidance on proper diplomatic protocols and explaining his government's cautious approach. He expected a formal response written in diplomatic language. What he received was a personal message from Chen herself. "Admiral," her recording began, "I understand you've been assigned as negotiator. Good. You're the only Valorian I've met who seemed to actually hear what I was saying at Threshold. Most of your colleagues appear to think we're bluffing or irrational. You at least seem to recognize that we meant exactly what we said." She paused, and Kresh noticed signs of fatigue in her expression. "I need you to understand something about humans, Admiral. We don't bluff about existential threats. We can't afford to. We're a young species in galactic terms. We have fewer resources than the major powers. We compensate for that through innovation and absolute determination. When we tell you we've built a weapon that can destroy fleets, we have. When we tell you we're willing to use it, we are. Not eagerly, not happily, but we will use it if we must." Chen looked directly at the recorder, and Kresh felt like she was speaking specifically to him across the light years. "Your government is trying to calculate whether we're serious, whether Final Argument is real, whether you can call our bluff and resume the invasion. Let me save you the calculation. Yes, we're serious. Yes, it's real. No, you can't call the bluff because it's not a bluff. If Valorian ships enter human space with hostile intent again, we will destroy them. All of them. We'll accept the moral weight of those deaths because the alternative, letting your empire conquer and subjugate us, is worse." She leaned back slightly. "But here's what I hope you'll help your government understand. We don't want that outcome. Every Valorian who dies is a tragedy. Every family destroyed is a failure of diplomacy. We built Final Argument as a last resort, not a first option. We'd much rather negotiate fair terms, establish borders both sides can accept, and find ways to coexist peacefully. We can do that, Admiral. Your species and mine can both walk away from this with dignity and security intact." "The question," Chen concluded, "is whether your government will let us, or whether they'll keep pushing until someone has to activate Final Argument and prove it works exactly as advertised. I hope you can help them make the right choice, because if you can't, a lot of people are going to die, and neither of us will be able to claim we didn't see it coming." The recording ended. Kresh sat in silence, processing Chen's words. She'd laid out the situation with brutal clarity. The Valorian government could choose peace or continue aggression. But continued aggression would lead to exactly the outcome they feared most, proof that Final Argument worked through demonstration on Valorian crews. The mathematics really were absolute, just not in the way Chancellor Vex had meant. If Final Argument existed and worked, fighting was suicide. If it didn't exist, they could win the war but at enormous cost given human resistance tactics. The only rational choice was negotiation. But rationality didn't always govern policy, especially in an empire built on conquest. Kresh would have to navigate political realities, military pride, and centuries of imperial tradition to reach any accommodation with humanity. The diplomatic challenge ahead might prove harder than any military campaign. His console chimed with another incoming message, this one from Coalition Command. It contained detailed technical specifications, energy readings, and simulation data. Everything the Coalition had regarding final argument short of the actual weapon designs. A note from Chen explained, "We're sharing this so you can convince your government we're not lying. Show them the math. Show them the physics. Help them understand that we didn't build this weapon lightly, and we won't hesitate to use it if necessary." Kresh spent hours reviewing the data. The specifications were staggering. Final argument wasn't just a powerful weapon, it was a fundamental rethinking of destructive capability. The humans had taken theories about quantum-level matter manipulation, zero-point energy extraction, and causality-breaking weapon effects and combined them into a single integrated system. The math checked out. The physics, while exotic, were sound. If these specifications were accurate, final argument could do exactly what Chen claimed. He packaged the data carefully and transmitted it to the High Council with a simple note. "They're not bluffing. We need to negotiate in good faith or prepare to lose the war in a single engagement." The Council's response took 3 days. During that time, Kresh monitored military communications and noticed with alarm that new fleet formations were being organized. Despite his warnings, despite the evidence, some faction within the government was preparing to test human resolve again. When the Council's official reply finally arrived, it confirmed his fears. Yes, Kresh would serve as negotiator. Yes, diplomatic channels would remain open. But simultaneously, Admiral Grex, a hardliner known for favoring aggressive tactics, was assembling a secondary fleet. The plan was transparent. Talk peace while preparing for war. Force the humans to either use final argument or reveal they couldn't. Kresh understood the strategy and hated it. The Empire was gambling millions of lives on the hope that humans were bluffing. If they were wrong, those millions would die to satisfy political pride and strategic miscalculation. He sent another message to Chen, this one marked urgent. "Captain, my government is preparing another fleet despite diplomatic overtures. I don't believe I can stop them. They're convinced you're either lying about final argument or won't actually use it against a larger force. Is there any way to demonstrate the weapon's capability without actually destroying ships? Some proof that might convince them?" Chen's response was almost immediate. "Admiral, we've already shared every piece of evidence we can. We've given you technical specifications, energy readings, theoretical models. We've explained our position clearly. Your government has all the information needed to make the right decision. If they choose to disbelieve that information, there's nothing more we can add short of actual demonstration." She paused in the recording, choosing her next words carefully. "However, I can arrange one additional proof. There's an asteroid in the Threshold system, roughly the size of a Valorian cruiser. We can destroy it using final argument at reduced power. Your ships can observe from safe distance. The display won't prove the weapon works at full capability, but it should demonstrate that we possess destructive capacity far beyond conventional weapons." "Let me be clear, though," Chen added. "This is the last concession we're making. After this demonstration, if your government still chooses to attack, we will respond with full force. No more warnings, no more chances. Just the weapon activating and every Valorian ship in human space ceasing to exist. Make sure your council understands that. Make sure Admiral Grex understands it, because we're done trying to convince people who don't want to be convinced." Kresh forwarded Chen's proposal to the High Council, adding his strongest recommendation that they accept the demonstration and abandon plans for renewed military action. The response was predictably divided. Half the council wanted to observe the demonstration. The other half insisted it was another bluff or trick. Admiral Grex, contacted privately by Kresh, was dismissive. I've fought in 17 major campaigns across 9 star systems. I've seen every type of weapon imaginable. This final argument is either elaborate theater or a weapon with severe limitations they're hiding. Either way, when my fleet arrives at human space, we'll get real answers, not demonstrations on conveniently chosen asteroids. You're going to get millions of people killed, Kresh warned. I'm going to complete the mission the Empire assigned, Grex corrected. Conquest of human space, acquisition of their territories and resources, establishment of Valorian dominance. If their weapon is real and effective, better to discover that now before they have time to build more. If it's fake, better to call the bluff now before they convince other species to try similar tactics. The logic was impeccable and horrifying. From a purely strategic standpoint, Grex was correct. But strategy didn't account for the moral weight of all those deaths. It didn't consider what it meant to force humanity to actually use their deterrent weapon. It didn't imagine the galaxy-wide implications of demonstrating that overwhelming conventional military force could be negated by a single sufficiently advanced weapon system. Kresh made one final attempt. He contacted Captain Chen directly, using secure channels that bypassed official diplomatic protocols. Captain, I've failed. My government is sending another fleet. Admiral Grex commands it. He's convinced you're bluffing or that final argument has limitations you're hiding. I can't stop him. I can't even slow him down. He'll be at human space within 2 weeks. Chen's face on the display showed no surprise. We expected this. Hoped it wouldn't happen, but expected it. Your species isn't the first to think we're lying about our capabilities. The difference is, we actually built what we claimed. She sighed. Thank you for trying, Admiral. For what it's worth, I believe you genuinely wanted to prevent more death. Unfortunately, you're outvoted and outranked. What happens now? Kresh asked. Now we wait for Grex, Chen said simply. We make one final offer to withdraw. He'll refuse. And then... She trailed off, but Kresh understood the unspoken conclusion. Then final argument would prove it wasn't a bluff at all. Admiral Grex reviewed his fleet with satisfaction. 22,000 capital ships this time, nearly double what Kresh had brought to Threshold. 50,000 support vessels, advanced shielding systems designed specifically to counter exotic energy weapons. Distributed command structures that would allow portions of the fleet to continue fighting even if the flagship was destroyed. Every lesson from the first encounter had been analyzed and addressed. The Valorian Empire had committed nearly a third of its total military capacity to this operation. Success would open human space to conquest and restore the Empire's reputation. Failure was not a consideration Grex entertained seriously. All battle groups report ready, his tactical officer announced. Scouts confirm the human defense position is similar to last time. Single vessel, same configuration. The Remembrance is waiting for us. Of course it is, Grex said. They can't run and they can't hide. Their only option is to repeat whatever psychological trick worked on Kresh. He activated fleet-wide communications. All ships, this is Admiral Grex. Today we face an enemy who has convinced themselves that threats can substitute for actual military power. They've built their entire defense on the hope that we'll be frightened by sensor readings and confident speeches. We will not be frightened. We will not be deterred. We will complete our mission and restore honor to the Valorian Empire. The fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Grex had studied recordings of Kresh's encounter hundreds of times, noting every detail. The energy readings, the targeting locks, Chen's calm delivery. It was masterfully executed theater, he'd give them that. But theater wasn't warfare. The Remembrance appeared on sensors exactly where expected. The ship looked identical to the last encounter, mid-sized human cruiser, no remarkable external features, energy signature reading as dormant. Then, as the Valorian fleet entered weapons range, the signature began climbing. Energy readings increasing exponentially, reported the sensor officer. Pattern matches recordings from Threshold. Expected, Grex replied. Continue advance. All ships maintain formation. The energy readings doubled, tripled. The remembrance began to glow with the same brilliant light that had surrounded it during the first encounter. The light expanded into a sphere, growing brighter with each passing second, until automated systems started filtering visual displays. "Targeting lock detected," announced the defense coordinator. "Single source. Tracking all ships simultaneously. Pattern matches. Threshold recordings exactly." "Also expected," Grech said. "All ships, ignore the lock. Continue advance. Prepare to fire on my command." Captain Chen's face appeared on the main display. She looked different from the recordings, older somehow, or perhaps just more tired. Her expression carried the same resignation Kresh had described, but also something else. Sadness, perhaps, or regret. "Admiral Grex," she said quietly, "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Coalition vessel Remembrance. Your fleet has entered human space with apparent hostile intent. I'm required to ask, will you withdraw peacefully?" "Absolutely not," Grex replied. "Your tricks worked once, Captain. They won't work again. We've analyzed everything about your supposed superweapon. We've prepared countermeasures. We've committed sufficient forces that even if you damage some ships, the rest will overwhelm you. Your position is hopeless." Chen nodded as if she'd expected that exact response. "Then I need you to understand what happens next. Not for my sake, I've made peace with it, but for yours and for everyone watching across the galaxy. What happens in the next few minutes will define how humanity is perceived for generations. I want it on record that we gave you every opportunity to avoid this outcome." "More theater," Grech said dismissively. "All ships arm weapons. Prepare to fire in sequence Alpha." "Final argument is fully charged," Chen continued as if he hadn't spoken. "All safeties are deactivated. Firing authorization has been granted by Coalition Command. The weapon is ready to deploy on my order. This is your last chance, Admiral. Please, withdraw your forces. We don't want to do this." "You won't do it," Grex countered. "Because you can't. Final argument is either a bluff or a weapon with limitations that make it impractical for actual warfare. Either way, when we prove that today, no one will ever take human threats seriously again. Your entire deterrent strategy collapses the moment we call your bluff." Something changed in Chen's expression. The sadness deepened, but underneath it appeared a core of absolute certainty. "I'm not bluffing, Admiral. I've never been bluffing, and in about 30 seconds you're going to understand exactly what that means." Grex cut the communication. "All ships, fire at will. Focus targeting on the Remembrance. I want that ship reduced to atoms." The Valorian fleet opened fire. 22,000 capital ships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. Energy beams capable of cracking moons, missiles designed to pierce the heaviest armor, kinetic rounds moving at significant fractions of light speed. The combined firepower could have sterilized a planet in minutes. All of it focused on a single human vessel. The weapons struck the sphere of light surrounding the Remembrance and simply ceased to exist. Not deflected, not absorbed. They hit the barrier and vanished as if they'd never existed at all. Energy readings showed that Final Argument's field was converting incoming attacks directly to additional power, feeding the very system designed to destroy the Valorian fleet. "Impossible," breathed Grex's tactical officer. "They're using our own weapons to charge their system." Grex felt his confidence waver for the first time. This wasn't theater. This was technology so far beyond Valorian capabilities that they might as well have been throwing rocks at a warship. Captain Chen's voice cut through every communication system in the fleet, not appearing on displays this time, just her voice, calm and clear and terrible in its certainty. "Admiral Grex, all Valorian vessels, you've fired on a coalition ship. You've demonstrated hostile intent beyond any doubt. Under coalition military law and the rules of engagement we've transmitted to your government repeatedly over the past weeks, I am now authorized to use any force necessary to defend human space and protect human lives. The light surrounding Remembrance pulsed. The ship's energy signature climbed to levels that broke the Valorian sensor scales. Numbers scrolled past too quickly to read, each one higher than the last. "I'm activating final argument," Chen said. "I'm doing it because you've given me no choice, because diplomacy failed, because warnings failed, because every peaceful option has been exhausted. What happens next is on you, Admiral. Your choice, your decision, your responsibility." "All ships, emergency jump," Grech shouted. "Retreat immediately." But jump drives required time to charge, time to calculate coordinates, time the Valorian fleet didn't have. The sphere of light surrounding Remembrance contracted suddenly, collapsing down to a point source brighter than nearby stars. For one frozen moment, everything stopped. Sensors stopped reporting. Communications stopped functioning. It was as if the universe itself held its breath. Then final argument fired. The effect didn't travel at light speed. It didn't travel at all in any conventional sense. One moment the Valorian fleet existed, 22,000 capital ships, 50,000 support vessels, hundreds of millions of crew members. The next moment, a sphere of pure destruction expanded from Remembrance to encompass the entire fleet position. Ships didn't explode, they didn't burn or break apart. They ceased to exist. Every atom, every molecule, every quantum of matter that made up those vessels and everyone aboard them was converted directly to energy according to equations humanity had finally learned to apply practically. The light from that conversion would be visible across 3 star systems. The process took 8 seconds. When it ended, empty space remained where the second greatest armada in Valorian history had been. No debris, no wreckage, no survivors, just vacuum and the rapidly dispersing energy signature of 70,000 ships ceasing to exist simultaneously. The Remembrance sat alone in empty space, its sphere of light fading, energy readings dropping back to normal operational levels. The ship's hull showed no damage. Its systems reported optimal function. Inside, Captain Sarah Chen sat in her command chair, watching displays that confirmed what she already knew. Final argument had worked exactly as designed. "All targets eliminated," her tactical officer reported mechanically. "No Valorian vessels detected in the system. Weapon system powering down according to standard protocols." Chen closed her eyes. She'd just killed hundreds of millions of people. People with families, friends, dreams, hopes. People who'd followed orders and done what their government commanded. People who'd never personally hurt anyone but had died because their leaders made terrible choices. "Send message to Coalition Command," she said quietly. "Second Valorian fleet destroyed. Human space is secure. No coalition casualties." She paused. "And send a message to the Valorian government. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them every death today was preventable. Tell them we're still ready to negotiate peace terms whenever they are." The bridge crew processed her orders in silence. There was no celebration, no sense of victory. They'd won the most one-sided military engagement in recorded history by committing the largest single act of killing anyone had ever witnessed. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like failure on a cosmic scale. Admiral Kresh received the news in his quarters. The official report was clinical. Second Fleet lost with all hands. No survivors. Confirmed destruction via human weapon system. Final argument. Estimated casualties, 437 million. 437 million Valorians, gone. Erased from existence because his government had refused to believe humans were serious. Because Admiral Grex had been so convinced that might equaled right. Because centuries of military tradition valued pride over pragmatism. Kresh's hands shook as he composed his report to the High Council. He didn't bother with diplomatic language or political maneuvering. He simply wrote, "They weren't bluffing. Final argument is real and works exactly as claimed. We've lost 437 million people, proving something we already knew. I strongly recommend immediate and unconditional peace negotiations. We cannot win this war." The High Council convened within hours. High Chancellor Vex, who'd been so confident about calling humanity's bluff, now looked diminished. His voice lacked its usual authority as he addressed the assembled members. "The human weapon called Final Argument has been confirmed. Admiral Grex's fleet was destroyed in its entirety. We face a strategic situation with no precedent in Imperial history. We surrender," said Council Member Presh flatly. "Immediately. Unconditionally. We beg the humans for terms and pray they're merciful enough not to bring Final Argument to our worlds." "Impossible," Thax protested weakly. "The Empire doesn't surrender. We've never surrendered. Centuries of tradition." "Tradition is dead," Presh snapped. "Tradition died with 437 million people who followed leaders too proud to admit they were wrong. We can cling to tradition and watch humanity erase every Valorian world one by one, or we can accept reality and negotiate peace while we still have a civilization to preserve." The debate was brief and bitter. In the end, pragmatism won over pride by narrow margin. The Valorian Empire, conqueror of 47 star systems, would seek peace with humanity. Not negotiated peace between equals, surrendered peace from a defeated power to one that had demonstrated absolute military superiority. Kresh was appointed chief negotiator, a position that felt like both honor and punishment. He would face Captain Chen and the coalition leadership, admitting defeat and begging terms. It was the most important mission he'd ever receive, and the one he least wanted. The negotiation summit was held on a neutral space station in unclaimed territory. Kresh arrived with a small diplomatic team, no military escort, no weapons. He'd been instructed to accept any human terms short of complete species extinction. The Empire's bargaining position was non-existent. Captain Chen met him at the docking bay personally. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept since the second battle. When she saw Kresh, something like relief crossed her face. "Admiral," she said, "thank you for coming. Thank you for being willing to talk." "Captain," Kresh replied carefully, "my government has sent me to negotiate surrender. We understand that we lost this war. We ask only that your terms include the survival of our species and our civilization." Chen's expression twisted. "Surrender? Admiral, we don't want your surrender. We never wanted your surrender. We want peace, actual peace. Mutual recognition of borders and sovereignty. Trade agreements that benefit both sides. Cultural exchange if possible. Everything a normal relationship between spacefaring civilizations should include." Kresh felt confused. "But you destroyed 2 of our fleets. You've demonstrated absolute military superiority. You could demand anything: reparations, territory, subjugation of our empire. Why would you settle for simple peace?" "Because we're not you," Chen said simply. "We didn't fight this war to conquer anyone or prove superiority. We fought because you invaded our space and killed our people. Now you've stopped invading. The war is over. We won by forcing you to stop. That's all we ever wanted." She gestured toward the conference room. "Come, let's discuss terms. Real terms between equals. Not a victor dictating to defeated enemies. Despite everything that's happened, we still believe peaceful coexistence is possible. We still think both our species can be better than our worst moments." The negotiations took 3 weeks. Kresh had expected the humans to demand harsh terms: reparations, territory concessions, military restrictions. Instead, they focused on establishing clear boundaries and communication protocols to prevent future conflicts. They asked for modest compensation for destroyed civilian stations, but nothing the Empire couldn't easily afford. They proposed mutual non-aggression pacts and cultural exchange programs. The coalition's goals became clear as discussions progressed. They wanted to ensure security while avoiding creating resentments that might fuel future wars. They were thinking generations ahead, considering how to build lasting peace rather than simply winning the current conflict. "I don't understand you," Kresh admitted during one session. "You have a weapon that makes you functionally invincible? You could demand tribute from every species in known space. You could build an empire that would make ours look tiny. Instead, you're offering us favorable trade terms and suggesting student exchange programs. Why?" Chen, who'd been reviewing proposed border demarcations, looked up. "Because empire isn't strength, Admiral. It's just accumulated weakness held together by force. Real strength is building something that lasts without needing constant military pressure to maintain. We learned that lesson from our own history. Took us thousands of years and billions of dead to finally understand it. We'd rather not see other species repeat our mistakes. But final argument gives you power that we'll never use again if we can possibly avoid it," Chen interrupted. "Do you know how many people were involved in the decision to activate final argument against Admiral Grex's fleet? 73 coalition officials, all of whom had to agree unanimously. Do you know how many of those 73 voted yes immediately? None. 0. It took 48 hours of debate before we reached consensus. And every single one of us will carry the weight of those 400 million deaths for the rest of our lives." She leaned back, looking older than her years. "We built final argument as deterrent. We hoped showing it once at threshold would be enough. When your government sent Grex anyway, we had to prove we were serious. But proving it meant becoming the very thing we built the weapon to prevent, mass murderers on a scale that defies comprehension. We won the war, Admiral, but we lost something important in the process. We lost the ability to claim we're better than people who start wars." Kresh finally understood. Humans had built the perfect weapon and discovered that using it perfectly was worse than losing without it. They'd achieved total military dominance and found that dominance came at moral costs they hadn't anticipated. They'd won absolutely and learned that absolute victory tasted like defeat. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now we try to be better," Chen said. "Your species and mine. We make peace that actually works. We build relationships based on mutual benefit rather than fear. We prove that the galaxy doesn't have to be a place where strength means conquest and weakness means subjugation." The Treaty of Threshold was signed 4 weeks after negotiations began. The Valorian Empire formally recognized coalition sovereignty over human space. Both sides agreed to clear borders, non-aggression pacts, and establishment of diplomatic relations. The coalition agreed to provide humanitarian aid to families of Valorian personnel killed in the war. The Empire agreed to modest reparations spread over 50 years. No side claimed victory. The treaty's preamble explicitly stated that both civilizations had suffered losses and both bore responsibility for finding better solutions than warfare. It was the first major interstellar treaty to include provisions for preventing future conflicts through mandatory mediation and cooling off periods before military action. Most importantly, by request of both sides, the treaty included complete disclosure of final argument's capabilities and limitations. The coalition revealed the weapon's technical specifications to every major galactic power, ensuring no one could claim ignorance about what humanity could do if attacked. But they also revealed the weapon's cost, the decades of research, the economic resources consumed, the ongoing maintenance requirements, and the emotional toll on those who'd authorized its use. The message was clear. Humanity could defend itself absolutely, but preferred not to. Any species considering aggression against human space now knew exactly what response they'd face. But they also knew humanity would negotiate in good faith if approached peacefully. Within a year, 7 other species established diplomatic relations with the coalition. Trade routes opened, cultural exchanges began, human technology started appearing in galactic markets alongside innovations from older civilizations. The species who'd seemed like dangerous newcomers became valued partners. The Valorian Empire struggled with the transition. Centuries of military tradition didn't fade easily. But with 2 fleets lost and the constant reminder that final argument existed, pragmatism won over pride. Valorian companies began trading with coalition merchants. Valorian students studied at human universities. Slowly, resentment transformed into cautious respect. Admiral Kresh remained as the Empire's ambassador to the coalition. He and Captain Chen developed a working relationship that gradually became genuine friendship. They gave joint lectures at military academies, discussing their respective roles in the Threshold Crisis and what both sides had learned. Their message was consistent. War was sometimes necessary, but always terrible. And preventing war through honest communication was infinitely preferable to winning through absolute force. Chen retired from military service 5 years after the treaty signing. Her final act as captain of the Remembrance was overseeing the installation of a memorial in the ship's main corridor. The memorial listed the names of every Valorian who died in the Second Fleet engagement, all 437 million of them. It took up 3 entire corridors of the ship, names etched in crystal in letters small enough to fit them all. At the memorial dedication, Chen spoke briefly to assembled coalition officials and Valorian dignitaries. These names represent the cost of the security we purchased, the cost of proving final argument works, the cost of making our enemies respect our determination. Every time I walked through these corridors during my service, I saw these names. I remembered that each one was a person, a life, someone who mattered to someone else. She paused, visibly emotional. We built final argument to protect ourselves. We succeeded. But protection cost these lives, and we can never forget that. We can never let our security come so easily that we forget what it cost to obtain. These names are my reminder, our reminder. The reminder for every human who serves aboard this ship or any coalition vessel. We have the means to defend ourselves absolutely. But that ability carries weight we must never ignore. Kresh attended the ceremony, standing among Valorian representatives who'd lost family members in the war. Afterward, he approached Chen privately. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for remembering them. For making sure they're not just numbers in a casualty report." "They never were," Chen replied. "They were people who died because their leaders and my leaders couldn't find better solutions. The least we can do is remember them as individuals, not statistics." Years later, historians studying the Threshold Crisis would debate its significance. Some saw it as humanity's emergence as a major galactic power. Others viewed it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of deterrent weapons. Still, others focused on the diplomatic breakthrough it represented. Enemies becoming partners through honest negotiation and mutual recognition of costs. But for those who'd lived through it, the crisis meant something simpler and more profound. It meant that sometimes the only way to achieve peace was to demonstrate absolute capacity for war while simultaneously proving absolute preference for peace. It meant that strength without restraint was just destruction, while restraint without strength was vulnerability. Humanity had found the balance. They'd built the perfect weapon and then dedicated themselves to never using it again. They'd achieved total military dominance and then chose to pursue cooperation instead of conquest. The galaxy noticed. Species that had viewed humans as weak newcomers began to reconsider. Powers that might have tested human resolve decided diplomacy was preferable. Wars that might have erupted instead became negotiations. Final argument sat aboard the Remembrance, fully functional but unused. Its mere existence prevented conflicts that would have killed billions across dozens of worlds. It was the weapon that ended war by making war too terrible to contemplate. And in corridors lined with names of the dead, humans remembered what that prevention had cost. They remembered that peace wasn't free, that security came with moral weight, that the galaxy was a better place than it had been. But that improvement was built on foundations of tragedy and loss. Captain Chen's final words at the memorial dedication became something of a motto for coalition military forces. We remember, so we never forget the cost of what we've built. We grieve, so we never treat death as acceptable. We honor these fallen, so we never stop working for a galaxy where weapons like final argument become unnecessary. The Valorian Empire adopted similar principles. Admiral Kresh worked tirelessly to reform military doctrine, emphasizing diplomacy and conflict prevention over conquest and domination. He faced resistance from traditionalists, but pressed forward, always carrying a data crystal containing the names of those lost in the Threshold Crisis. 20 years after the treaty signing, Kresh attended a ceremony at the Human Memorial Station established at the Threshold Gate location. The station honored all who died in the crisis, Valorian and human, military and civilian, those killed in battle and those who died in destroyed colonies. Standing before the memorial, surrounded by representatives from dozens of species, Kresh reflected on everything that had changed. The galaxy was more peaceful, more prosperous, more connected. Trade flourished where war might have raged. Cultural exchanges replaced invasion fleets. Younger generations of Valorians and humans studied together, often unaware of the bitter history their elders shared. It was better. Objectively, measurably better. But the cost of that improvement was carved in crystal across 3 corridors of a ship and etched in the memories of everyone who'd lived through those terrible weeks when the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if humanity would actually activate their impossible weapon. They had, and in doing so, they'd changed everything, not through conquest, not through subjugation, but through the absolute demonstration that some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences too severe to accept. The galaxy learned, slowly, painfully, but definitively. Humanity wasn't to be trifled with. But more importantly, humanity preferred partnership to domination, cooperation to conquest, peace to war. Final argument remained fully functional, regularly maintained, always ready. But its greatest victory wasn't the fleets it destroyed. It was the wars it prevented simply by existing. The lives saved because potential aggressors did the mathematics and decided negotiation was preferable to testing human resolve. In the end, humanity's answer to an invasion wasn't just a single vessel. It was the absolute determination to survive, the technological innovation to ensure that survival, and the moral clarity to remember that every death in service of survival carried weight that could never be set down. The Armada had braced for war. Humanity dispatched a single vessel. And the galaxy learned that sometimes, when backed by sufficient determination and capability, one vessel was more than enough.